yard. It was the first family trip for the sociologist and the psychologist and their favorite third wheel, the child, me, defining themselves in Cali, exploring the Kama Sutra and Bali traditions and their inner selves to the secret flotation tanks of altered states in the Hollywood Hills, ever a changing. As the tide coming into shore, freedom from the granite and mortar, the snow, and the honor of their brimstone families before they went west, where they met my mother and my co-parent. We were headed south to Mexico, my wide eyes sinking in every image of that road as the green of a dead lake at rainfall grows. A dream I watched from the back of the Chevy Vega midnight blue, our camping gear packed and up on a makeshift rack of luggage and foam futon mat to sleep on and to stay zen by reaching REM for everyone. As a vegetarian, sociologist, and psychologist get awfully cranky when being prevented from proper sleep. The sand and the dirt of San Felipe was not enough, and the first family trip with the child, me, just had to work for the coexistence with the new co-parent. These were my childlike days. The open rash levity that gnawed my hands as a tree today around this quill. They are tortured into the new beauty, the salve of these days remembering those. Without the scare or the story, without the scars or the story that was to follow. A road back from the jaded tomorrows to being childlike recreated, to keep my wonder, to keep my soul, to keep the middle road and that wonder of it all still. I was a strange child. I was an over-serious child. I was a genius child. I was an only child. That life had let down too much. I was an unwanted child, unjust. That the sociologist and the psychologist and my granite and mortar, snow and honor, East Coast destiny wanted very much. And now Indiana was jumping in with both feet at the new co-parent. We were crossing the border to set a camp on a trip to sand dollar beaches, dappling the days as stars at low tide. To my amazed open mind, and we were going deeper into this magical place of San Felipe, for the romance, for the bully moment of it all, as the early 80s rose in a trepidatious sky, rose in lightning pink sand dollars reflecting a sunrise sinking into the twinkling of the shore of the Mexican dawn under my baby toes. My beautiful open like a child mother always could bring her worried child to a smile with her expertise of psych gag, comedian trained and skilled for her driven, self-willed, skeptical baby daughter, whether she faked walking into a window or door or just hanging french fries out her nose, to always remind me and herself of the rich spice of the advice her mother and older brother Wise had given her, that she would never be my doctor. She was always my mother. The co-parent would have to catch up to the choice he was making. He could not be both as we headed up that mountain pass of Mexico, along the incredibly steep coast of the trail of Cabo San Lucas, in the storybook taco sacks mariachi bands of where the wind of the world stays, and how a mountain can descend to the beaches of San Felipe. But the Chevy Vega, with all its steel, was no adversary of the wind, and the sociologist and the psychologist began to feel frightened and decided to pull over. I can tell you to this day, my mother's pratfalls far outweighed her sight gags. As to whether she ever planned them, she would never say, as any other professional comedian. The sociologist's voice had sharpened its tone, making it clear to the psychologist and the child, me, he was getting out the car alone. Seemed logical to me, the child. I was small, I agreed. However, the psychologist did not. And before the fray became a nut, she was helping the sociologist like it or not. Out they went into the wild wind of those mountains, no matter how it blew. And they argued ever so politely about fair and equality and whoever could get their door open first. I sat back, Chevy Vega, midnight blue, and witnessed this as clear to me as this spring day, and this memory and its joy is where my spring stays, and evermore it warms my soul. The sociologist's door was bent backward from the strength of that mountain wind, but he got out in it anyway, after her, with all of his zen. Some secret thoughts of going back to being Christian, or whether he could be both. The psychologist watched this, but got her door open too, was able to get out a lone second for all women everywhere and their vote. As early 80s rose in a sunlit horizon and sunk crimson and gold as velvet paints against tinkling waters of the bay below. That day the sand dollars were made to wait. For either side, they arm in arm, Project Futon off the makeshift rack to the back of the hatchback, as I was small enough and I was the child, and all would survive, and this was clearly organized, functioning in a crisis. Good skills are like water for any self-willed baby daughter headed into the world that was as wild as the wind the mother and the co-parent stood out in. They were bickering like all the ages about how to get the futon in the back of the Vega. At the moment, the psychologist had the mat clutched at either end in both her hands, her arms wide open, as the sociologist used all his strength to lift the hatchback door and shove the futon in. Everything was going as planned, without too much OCD panic, but as we all are bound to learn, the sociologist called over his shoulder, and the psychologist turned into the wind. I repeat, the sociologist called over his shoulder, and the psychologist turned into the wind. The futon became a windsurfing sail, the psychologist a levitating flagpole, along with the hand grip she had on both sides of that mattress, a flag so proudly waving she was, up so high and carried so far that her landing could only be yar. I repeat, up so high and carried so far, her landing could only be yar. Her landing is what history is made of. Chuck Yeager and Chevy Chase would have been jealous. President Gerald Ford, remembering as less of a klutz, and the sociologist turning co-parent, was speechless. We all were completely zen. For back then, and in the moment. I cannot remember how we got the futon in the Chevy Vega dark blue. I just remember watching them, the psychologist and the sociologist, walking back to me in the sun, laughing and recalling the every moment as the doctors they would both become, Zen and Christian, as we continued up the mountain to the sand dollar shores, twinkling like stars under my baby toes, and my many, many blessed memories of Mexico. These days like those, and like no others, we chattering down the road as a newly bonded family full of hope. The psychologist, thankfully, would never be my doctor, ever so wise. She is my mother. Beautiful, complicated, joy, surprise, through all time. And I can tell you, around every bend, including the borders of heaven, my mother and I still always mend, and that is Yar.